Alright guys, how's it going? For me, one of the most intriguing aspects of AMD's second generation Ryzen desktop processor release was the inclusion of their StoreMI technology, which comes free with X470 motherboards and claims of loading your hard drive game library at SSD-like speeds. Essentially, this technology fuses slow drives to fast drives and uses machine intelligence in order to provide the best of both worlds. As you know, storage has been an age-old problem for the PC. Hard drives have been around for a very long time, and yes, it's true that they do continue to increase in capacity. However, they are stuck with this spinning magnetic disk and they are very slow. And due to this lack of speed, they are very cheap per gigabyte. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the NVMe drives. Extremely fast, very expensive per gigabyte, and simply too small to hold larger applications and most games. Now, your typical SATA SSDs are something of a midpoint. They are much faster than hard drives, but still a lot more expensive in terms of gigabyte per dollar. So AMD claims their StoreMI technology solves most of this problem by allowing SSD-like speeds with a hard drive's massive capacity. Pretty big claims here of games loading almost 3 times faster with StoreMI, with applications launching up to 10 times faster. These are some pretty large claims that I will be putting to the test. Now, before I start here, a disclaimer. AMD did send me this whole Ryzen package: the CPU, motherboard, 2TB hard drive, a 250GB SSD, and 16GB of RAM. AMD has loaned this to me for the review. However, all of this remains their property, and they may recall this from me at any time, possibly to pass on to other press. So that's my disclaimer out of the way. Before we get to the benchmarks, a word on my test methodology. Right, so first of all, I have gone with a fresh install of Windows on the hard drive. Now, to many of you, this may come as a surprise because most people would buy a solid-state drive to use it as a boot disk. But in fact, in AMD's StoreMI user guide, they actually recommend that if starting with a fresh Windows install, the operating system should be installed on the hard drive rather than the solid-state drive. So this shows some kind of confidence in their product, which I was keen to test. So here it is right now, my 2TB hard drive, as you can see with the Windows install. Now, it's the latest version of Windows, 18.03. All of my drivers are updated, including the latest Radeon drivers, and I have installed Steam, Battle.net, as you can see, a bunch of games, and also the Boot Racer application for measuring boot times. My intention here is to benchmark the loading times of all of this, all these games, and the boot time for Windows, first of all on the mechanical hard drive, and after I'm done with that, I'll install StoreMI and rerun the exact same tests. All the games have their intros disabled, as we are trying to compare disk loading times, not the duration of the intros. I will reset the PC, at which point Boot Racer will run automatically, giving the result of the boot duration. I will then benchmark the loading times of all the games one after the other, so as to remove the disk cache from the equation, and after that's done, I will reboot the PC again in order to reset all the memory. I am confident this will give the most accurate results. A more accurate representation of what the average user would actually be doing with their PC. So let's get started with the benchmarks. Right, so after what is best described as laborious testing, the results are in, and first of all, we're having a look at the Windows boot time. There's actually quite a bit of variance in there. I am not entirely sure what that is all about, but the worst result, the very first result, was 79 seconds to boot Windows, with the best result being at 57 seconds. That was over 6 runs, and there's quite a spread there. I'm not entirely happy with that, but as you can see there, the average boot time was 68 seconds. That is quite a long time to wait on Windows loading, and in actual fact, it's quite a bit worse than that, because even though Windows may be loaded, the entire system feels very sluggish for many seconds afterwards. Even just trying to load my OBS software, I can double click on the icon here and it may take another 10-15 seconds before the program actually loads. So I wouldn't say these numbers are particularly representative of the actual experience. There's more to this than simply boot times. There's also the responsiveness of the system to take into consideration. And this next part probably won't be the most scientific test ever, but I'm just going to count from 3 down to 1 and then click on my Firefox icon on the taskbar to give you an idea of just how unresponsive running Windows off a hard drive is. And of course, I'll do the same test after StoreMI is installed. So 3, 2, 1, click. I mean, that's just absolutely horrific. Obviously though, that was the first time after a boot. Now that Firefox is in memory, it will of course load much faster. as you can see. But again, this is completely fair as a test of the hard disk. But moving on to the game results, and starting with Ashes of the Singularity, I simply measured the time that the game takes to load, and it takes a very, very long time to load in fact. An average of 99 seconds over 6 runs. That's quite a long time to wait on a game loading. Now the next one I decided to throw in was Dragon Age Origins. It's an old game now, and the point of this was to try out something that loaded that much faster. In the case of Dragon Age Origins, over 6 runs, the game took 21.5 seconds to load, and those numbers were pretty consistent over all 6 runs. Now the third game I tested was Elite Dangerous, but rather than measure the loading time, I instead decided to measure how long it takes to get from the title screen into the game. And over the 6 runs, that was 26.5 seconds on average. Now next up was ARKANE Studios' Prey, a game that I enjoyed immensely last year. Once again I decided to load a save game, and this is a pretty long loading game as well, averaging 54 seconds over the 6 runs. Now the 5th game on the list was Sid Meier's Civilization 6, which took an average of 30.7 seconds to load over the 6 runs. Loading a saved game around the medieval era took even longer than loading the game. That was an average of 43.7 seconds. The penultimate test was Total War Warhammer. In this case, I chose to fight a quest battle, the Sword of Unholy Power. And this one took a pretty eye-watering 87.3 seconds to load. And the final test was the one that AMD tested themselves. Pretty interesting result in this one, in fact, in World of Warcraft. I also benchmarked from the character selection screen into the game. What was interesting about this though was, the first 2 runs took 39 and 36 seconds, with the final 4 runs taking far less time, 26, 25, 25 and 26 seconds. So there's something kinda strange going on there with World of Warcraft. Overall though, 29.5 seconds on average. Right, so now it's time to install StoreMI, but before that we're going to back up the system. It is said that there are 2 types of people, those who make backups and those who will, and the reason that this video is so late is that I was in the latter camp. I am now a person who makes backups. Your best option would be to go into Windows Backup, click on More Options, you actually need to add a backup drive, and down the bottom see Advanced Settings, and you'd actually want to make a system image backup. That way if anything goes drastically wrong, you can back up the entire system from a disk image by using a Windows install disk. So I have already done that. Now I also just installed 2 new solid state drives, a 500GB SSD and a 250GB SSD. However, as you can see, we still only have the C drive in Windows, and this will likely be the case when you install a new SSD too. But if you now just right click on your PC, click on Manage, and now click on Disk Management, and you get the message you must initialize the disks before Logical Disk Manager can access it. Just click on OK here, and now we can see that I have 3 disks, 2 of them are unallocated. You can either leave them for now, or simply right click and select New Simple Volume. Give it whatever label you want. Something that makes sense though, and I'm going to do the same thing for the smaller one. Now that that's done, both drives will appear in Windows. For StoreMI, I will be combining the C drive with the 250GB SSD. So let's now download and install StoreMI. The software can be downloaded from AMD.com, and there's no need for a license. The installer simply checks that you have an AMD 400 series chipset, and it will not allow you to install the software unless you do. Now you can pretty much just next your way through this. I always select Custom. We now have a StoreMI icon on the desktop, and the software will install the Java runtime, after which you will be asked to reboot the system. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Right, so now we've rebooted and we've got a new icon at the bottom right of the taskbar. We can see though that there are currently still 0 tier drives and nothing is being accelerated. To run the software, just double click on the icon on the desktop. Now there's 2 options, create a bootable StoreMI or a new non-bootable StoreMI. I will of course be creating a boot drive using the C drive and the smaller SSD. Click on yes. Right, so we're now ready to create the StoreMI drive. As you see, the hard drive is already pre-selected in the slow tier, and for the fast tier, we are selecting the smaller SSD. The software will now transform the boot drive and reboot. On rebooting, the system will optimize files before StoreMI can start accelerating applications, and that didn't take too long. And if you now mouse over the icon in the taskbar, we can see that data is now being accelerated. So we'll do one more reboot and then start the benchmarks. Right, so starting off with the Windows boot times again, and looking back at the pre-StoreMI hard drive times, we saw an average boot duration of 68 seconds. And as I mentioned back then, there was quite a bit of variance in the times. as high as 79 seconds and as low as 57 seconds. On the first full timed run under StoreMI, Windows booted in only 44 seconds. That's shaving off over a third of the boot time compared to the hard drive. Moving on again to the game benchmarks, and again Ashes of the Singularity escalation. On the hard drive alone, the average boot time was 99 seconds, and for the first StoreMI run, Ashes loaded in a glacial 136 seconds. Comparing the Dragon Age Origins average, which was 21.5 seconds, against StoreMI's first run of 23 seconds, again shows an increase, though not nearly as marked as what we saw with Ashes. The hard drive average of Elite Dangerous was 26.5 seconds, compared to 26 seconds on StoreMI. Moving on to Prey though, and we see yet another large increase in the loading time. 54 seconds on average for the hard drive took 76 seconds on the first StoreMI run. In Civilization 6, the loading time of 30.7 seconds on the hard drive had increased to 36 seconds on StoreMI. The save game load average of 43.7 seconds, however, was down to 38 seconds on StoreMI. Moving on to Total Warhammer, turned up something quite unexpected. Now remember, this was a long load on the hard drive, averaging 87.3 seconds over the 6 runs, but on StoreMI's first run, the Sword of Unholy Power battle took over 3 minutes to load, 187 seconds, more than twice the average time off the hard drive. And if you thought that was bad, it's about to get even worse. 29.5 seconds on average in Warcraft for the hard drive had increased to a mammoth 73 seconds with the first StoreMI run. That's not exactly what it says on AMD's slide, is it? And it looks like we're off to a pretty inauspicious start. But all of this, of course, makes perfect logical sense. The reason the Windows boot time was down is because this was not actually the very first Windows boot after StoreMI had installed, because Windows had already rebooted during the installation process. During the reboot, StoreMI would have been mapping parts of the reboot process onto the solid-state drive, and that is why during the next reboot, the timed boot, the Windows boot time was much lower. But in every case of the gaming, this is the first time that all of these games have loaded under StoreMI. So in every instance, not only is the game loading into memory, StoreMI is also moving the data from the hard drive onto the solid-state drive. And in some cases, this is taking a very long time, as you saw in Ashes, Total War Warhammer, and World of Warcraft. And of course, Prey also had quite a large increase in duration. So that is what the software should be doing, and that appears to be what it's doing. And if it's all working properly, we should hopefully start to see a decrease in loading times during the second and subsequent runs. So let's see if that theory holds. And again, after each set of benchmarks, I'm restarting the PC in order to clear out all the memory and the disk cache. And on Windows' second timed load, the time had increased to 47 seconds, up from the previous 44. Perhaps slightly disappointing there. I was hoping to see these numbers come down a bit. It is of course still much faster than the 68 seconds on average off the hard drive. But what we really want to see is the improvement in the game benchmarks. And thankfully, that is what we got. Ashes 2 minutes and 16 seconds from the first run was now loading in only 40 seconds. Dragon Age from 23 seconds down to 13, and Elite Dangerous previous 26 seconds was now down to only 16 seconds. Moving on to Prey though, and again perhaps another disappointment. The second run of 50 seconds is well down on the previous run of 76 seconds, but is still really too close to the old hard drive average of 54 seconds. Looking at Civilization 6, again a nice decrease in loading time, down to 24 seconds from 36 during the game load, and down to 27 seconds from 38 seconds while loading the saved game. Those are starting to look like pretty nice savings. But the big one, Total War Warhammer, an over 3 minute load of the first run was now down to only 43 seconds on the second run. The Sword of Unholy Power battle now loads in only half the time it takes for the hard drive. And again, finally for this set of runs, World of Warcraft, a pretty disastrous 73 second first run was now down to 38 seconds. And while that's a great improvement, it's still a disappointing 8.5 seconds slower than the hard drive average. It looks like we're going to need to do some more runs. Right, so moving on to round 3, and the Windows boot time is back down to 44 seconds. This one's beginning to look pretty consistent now. Ashes saw a further drop from 40 seconds down to 34 seconds, and Dragon Age was now down to only 10 seconds loading time, less than half the time of the mechanical hard drive. Elite Dangerous saw a further 2-second reduction, and finally we saw a satisfying result in Prey. A massive drop from 50 seconds down to 20 22 seconds, and that is now much less than half the time taken by the hard drive. A further large drop in the Civilization 6 loading time, down to 17 seconds there, with another drop in the save game load. And this next one came as something of a surprise because I certainly wasn't expecting to see yet another massive drop in the total Warhammer time. We've now gone from over 3-minute loading time down to 43 seconds, and now again down to only 21 seconds while loading this quest battle. That is now loading 4 times faster than the mechanical hard drive. But what about the major disappointment so far, World of Warcraft? Again, here we now finally see a satisfying result, with loading time dropping from 38 down to 21 seconds. And finally, after 3 runs of StoreMI, every game tested now exhibits a very large decrease in loading times over the mechanical hard drive. Looking at run 4, and we can see that most of it has tailed off. 45 seconds for Windows, 37 seconds for Ashes, that's slightly up on the previous one. Dragon Age drops another second. Elite Dangerous still at 14 seconds. Another decent drop for Prey though, down to only 18 seconds from 22. Civilization 6 stays the same. Warhammer loses a second. But interestingly, World of Warcraft now down to only 14 seconds. And that is now also less than half the time of the mechanical hard drive. Moving on to the final 2 runs, and it's fairly clear now that most of it will start to tail off. Most of it was the same as the previous run, again though, apart from World of Warcraft, which was now down to only 10 seconds loading time. And finally, now we see the numbers that AMD got on their own slide. 29.5 seconds on the mechanical hard drive, 10 seconds using StoreMI. And this final chart shows the true performance advantage of StoreMI over the mechanical hard drive. Now after all that, there will be 1 or 2 questions that you would like asked. For example, you saw me loading Warcraft in one city, but what about in some other cities? Does the game still load a lot faster? Now let's just put that one to the test, because I've never been in Pandaria yet on this PC. And that only took 22 seconds. That is much, much faster than the 73 seconds my very first load of Warcraft took. Now let's check out another level in Prey. We already did the Arboretum, so let's now try the Talos 1 bridge. Remember, the first load of Prey was around 76 seconds in duration, with the fastest loads around 18 seconds. And that only took 15 seconds. Again, I have not been here at all in this level on this PC. So that would appear to answer that question on loading different areas, loading saved games. And looking at the little icon in the taskbar, we can see almost 50 gigabytes of data is being accelerated by StoreMI. As you play more games, obviously this number increases. But 50 gigabyte really isn't all that much, considering the number of games I've already loaded. But let's now try out the responsive test. Again, a simple countdown on Firefox. 3, 2, 1, click. And as you can see, that was quite a bit faster than what we had with the normal hard drive. Now for the final test and benchmark, because some of you will be wondering just how close to normal solid state drive speeds does StoreMI get, and you may also be wondering if it's possible to move games and files around from the tier drive to other drives. So let's find out. And I'm going to use Ashes of the Singularity again, and by right clicking on the game, selecting Properties, and then choosing the Local Files tab and move the Install folder, I will move it to my other SSD, and it shouldn't take too long to complete. And we see here Ashes was using around 21 gigabytes of data on drive C, which is now on drive D, and now we get the completed message. So once again, it's time to benchmark Ashes, and 1 or 2 more runs should hopefully suffice. Remember, under StoreMI, the quickest load time for Ashes was around 34-35 seconds. And that took 35.61 seconds, basically an identical load time to StoreMI. So that would appear to answer that question regarding performance. Now let's quickly move back to the C drive. As you can see, that appeared to have moved back with no problems whatsoever. There's now nothing on the D drive, and I'll just clear out the memory before benching it for the very last time. And that actually took about 70 seconds this time. Not really all that surprising. Right, so to finish off what has been one of the most difficult videos I have ever done in my life. As you may have gathered, I did lose a lot of data at one point, and the video is a week late because of that. But on top of that, there's been so much testing, so much retesting, and this is not simple software. There's a 54-page FAQ and a 38-page user guide. This is pretty complex software, although in most cases it should run pretty well out of the box. For me though, it didn't, and I had a lot of trouble. So be be aware of that. You may need to get your hands dirty in DOS in order to fix a problem or two. With that said, all eventualities are covered in both the user guide and the FAQ. Regarding the software itself, as you see, when it's working, it works absolutely fantastically well. I didn't even have time to check out the RAM drive part, but you can actually modify the StoreMI tier drive and add a DRAM cache. So that's going to add 2GB of RAM, basically to the same drive, the same StoreMI drive, which will speed up the system responsiveness even further. And that's how simple that was. But even though I've had all of these problems, I would do it again because, simply put, AMD's StoreMI technology is absolutely great. I stopped buying hard drives a few years ago because they were just too slow, and I now own 7 solid state drives, most of which were 500GB, and I had them on my workstation, and I had a game drive 1 and a game drive 2 and a game drive 3, and even though they all loaded quickly, I did not like that system. I would like to have all of my games on the one drive, not split over 3 drives, and obviously the costs were starting to mount as well. And this is when I realised just how good StoreMI actually is, because recently I got an external 4TB hard drive, the one that I used for my backup. And I noticed that I started putting some games onto that. Some games that were maybe extremely large, or games that I wasn't intending to play an awful lot of. Even with all my SSDs, I was either running out of space, or I felt that maybe 80 to 100GB of some games was not worth putting on an SSD. And this is when I realised that in some ways, StoreMI is even better than having SSDs, because those games that you wouldn't put onto an SSD, you could stick those onto a 4TB hard drive, forget all about them until one day you decide to play it again for a few days, and after the first couple of loads, you're gonna get the full benefit of that game on an SSD without having paid for the SSD. Even if you had paid for the SSDs, chances are you probably wouldn't waste SSD space on some games. You probably wouldn't have installed it anyway. StoreMI simply lets you install all your games onto a large hard drive, combine that with a very fast 256GB SSD, and gain the benefits of both. This is why, for me, in some ways, AMD's StoreMI technology is even better than the real thing. It's not perfect and could probably use some optimization. It'd be nice if we had a slider to set how aggressive StoreMI moves data around, but that's possibly nitpicking. Now, regarding the availability, only AMD 400 series chipsets. Currently that's only the X series. I am unsure if this will also include the B series motherboards. The fact is, this software costs about $20 to buy, so it may well be reserved for the X series chipsets. I would have liked to have seen AMD offer this, at least for the X370 owners, who also paid quite a lot of money on their motherboard 1 year previously, because clearly anybody with an X370 motherboard will not be upgrading to an X470 simply for this. But of course, technology always progresses, and really what this comes down to is AMD's new Ryzen 2000 series with a 400 series chipset was already very compelling value against the competing Intel platforms. You're getting more cores or more threads at a slightly cheaper price point. You're getting a much better cooling solution, and also on top of it now, you're looking at a value add from StoreMI which is worth at least $20. And to me would have been worth a lot more, because had I had this software a couple of years ago, I would probably only need 3 or 4 solid state drives, not 7. The choice between a 2700X and an 8700K is, for me, due to StoreMI, even further in favour of the Ryzen platform. But that's me finally done with this video. Be sure to check out all my links in the description below, my Amazon links, that kind of thing, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I should hopefully be back before too long with another few videos, so look out for those as well. And I'll catch you later, guys.